clicks that grow and somehow they can start to influence the larger decision making. And then finally, efficiency. Upgrades are automatic and proposal execution is automatic. We can run everything on a blockchain that's proof of stake that is really highly efficient for how much data we can put out there and agree on. So what are Homebase and Base DAO? Well, they are a front end and a back end to help create and manage DAOs on Tezos. So what is Base DAO? I'll start with the back end. So Base DAO is a set of smart contracts enabling anyone to create a DAO on Tezos, written in LIGO with tests in Lawrence and also in raw Michelson. What can it do? Well, anything from managing funds and metadata to executing arbitrary code. I'll talk a little bit more about this because we have a kind of a slot for what it can do. The base DAO itself is really just voting, proposing, managing funds in like some token stuff, just the core. And then we have a slot at the end when you actually execute the proposal. And then you can fill in any extra custom features that you need proposals to do. I'll talk a bit more about that later. So the key features of this DAO are it has a bring your own FA2 token. It does not include its own FA2 token. You can use whichever FA2 token you already have, such as the HDAO FA2 token. It uses TZIP16 metadata for flexibly off-chain metadata, often using IPFS. And then TZIP17 permits for feeless voting. TZIP17 describes a sort of meta transaction for Tezos, as you may be familiar with on Ethereum. And this allows us to sort of abstract the payment of gas fees away from actually sending in transactions, whether those transactions be voting transactions, actually sending tokens around, or anything else you might need to interact with the DAO. So here's how the stages kind of go forward. We have several users and nobody's particularly privileged. So anyone who has enough tokens for a bond for a proposal can create a proposal. If you want to have more tokens that are not those bring your own external tokens, you have to freeze or stake them. And then in the next stage, they will be available for you to actually use for voting or for new bonds. So each stage, people can, in the proposal stage, people create proposals, freeze tokens, etc. And then in the voting period, people actually vote on those proposals. The proposal can't last more than one voting period. So if it doesn't go through in this voting period, it fails. And then if there is a quorum and all the other conditions are met, it will pass and can be executed. And then finally, it cycles. We continue on, and people can unfreeze tokens once they've cleared. So what is the bring your own FA2 token, and how does that work? Well, BaseDAO wraps an existing FA2 token, and it produces this frozen or wrapped token, or you might even call it a staked token for proposing and voting. Now, these frozen tokens are in limbo until the next stage to prevent flash loan type attacks, because on Ethereum, it was discovered that this thing called a flash loan, where you have a contract level guarantee that somebody is going to loan out some tokens and then they will return them in that same block. And by making sure that things cross separate blocks, it makes it much harder to perform these sorts of attacks. And then all but your partially frozen tokens may be used or unfrozen at any time. You retain complete sovereignty over your tokens, and you don't even necessarily have to have any tez to trade your tokens or interact with the DAO. And frozen tokens.
When you say frozen tokens, do you mean like just DAO or Tezos too?
Yeah, so frozen is just the DAO tokens. They're the staked tokens in the DAO. They're the internal tokens you can vote with and propose with and everything else. And you have to trade back to normal tokens to make sure that you didn't actually get them this block and you're doing a flash loan attack. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. All right, and then as I mentioned before, if you're making a proposal, you do have to have these tokens that have cleared. And just to point out real quick, because of the separate freezing and voting, it also means that if we're in the middle of the voting period and maybe we've reached a 40 to 60% quorum and somebody is saying that, hey, maybe I really want to change the outcome of this vote, Well, they can't suddenly buy a bunch of tokens or trade for a bunch of tokens and then use them in this case. They would have to find already frozen tokens that would be held by other accounts. And then those are non-transferable. So then how do we actually tell that enough people actually showed up? Because that kind of prevents people from showing up in the middle of the voting stage, but how do we make sure that we behave well as we see things like a viral growth, or maybe slightly fewer people are voting because there was viral growth and now it's kind of stabilizing? Well, base DAO adjusts its quorum similarly to how Tezos does. It's automatically based on participation in the previous vote. So if you vote yes, you vote no, or you vote neither, you vote to abstain, then you are considered to have participated, and you are considered an active user from the perspective of the vote. So there's a couple config parameters, but more or less the quorum goes up by a percentage towards the recent participation or down. And then there's a cap on how big the percentage growth or small the percentage shrink can be. And then finally, there's a maximum and minimum quorum. And all three of these are kind of like safety rails or a seatbelt on quick changes, because you want to have the absolute bounds because perhaps you don't want to allow the quorum to reach a number over 80% or below 20%. But you also don't want it to change too quickly. So here's two simulations of how that quorum would change over time. First of all, given a linear increase from about 20% participation to 100% participation, you can see that at first it turns quite rapidly and then stabilizes out and finally kind of caps out at this maximum quorum that was set. And then this is an exponential growth example because I mentioned more viral growth. And you can see that it quickly catches up a little bit and then it kind of steadies out, slowly catching up. But if we have viral growth, it takes a while for that spike in how many people have participated to actually reach the quorum, to prevent volatility in how many people are participating from preventing people from voting or getting proposals through.
Okay, back up a little. Are you going to go through the process of freezing a token later?
Not too much, because it's just like an FA2 transfer.
Like
it's a very
when you
simple...
say freeze a token, it's simply trading your tezos for DAO.
So you're trading
them?
your external DAO token. So in this case, it would be like an HDAO token or like a frozen HDAO. And then that frozen HDAO you could actually vote with and stuff. And it's just like a swap entry point.
I don't understand what this freezing part is like. I have like the DAO, the HDAO, but is it already frozen, or do I have to do something?
So yes, you have to freeze it to vote with it. That you can... HDAO can be traded to people, that you can give as much of your HDAO away as you would like, but we don't want people reallocating frozen tokens arbitrarily. And that's why you have to freeze the HDAO, that is, make a swap. And it's 1-to-1. So if you have 10 HDAO, you can swap it for 10 frozen tokens or 5 frozen tokens and 5 HDAO, or any other 1-to-1 amount. And then those frozen tokens must then be withdrawn back to HDAO to trade them again. And this follows the proposal and voting cycle, that you would freeze your HDAO before the next voting cycle if you wanted to vote with them. I hope that makes a bit more sense.
I'm gonna look it up, like this freezing process. Thank you.
All right. Yep. All right. And then I mentioned TZIP 17 permits for feeless voting. So base DAO supports batched one-step permits for voting. There's also two-step permits where you submit the permit in a separate transaction, but these are made for the largest batches we can get, basically. So permits move signing the transaction from the protocol level, where you would tell a node your signature, and the node would check that you have enough gas, and at least when it's baked and all that. And that's a very low-level sort of transaction. We're moving that actually to the contract level, where on the contract level, all we really need is a signature that you've signed the contract that you want to submit the protocol to, the parameters to. You've added a timestamp on it so that it'll expire, kind of like if something gets lost in the mempool that you submitted to Tezos and somehow there was a bug and it doesn't get included for maybe a day, it gets dropped. That you can't have your transactions get like revived from you thought that they weren't going to go through, but maybe a month later they go through. That's prevented. And then also things like other things to prevent replay attacks, that it's an entirely unique signature. It only applies to this one instance of calling this contract. So those are all things that we can simulate, except for actually paying gas. We can simulate all of those at the contract level by accepting a signature along with the vote in the batch, and then simply checking all that the signature signs all of those additional details. And I mentioned that it abstracts gas fees, but the reason why I say this is that you can still have a sort of gas fee by saying, okay, I'm going to submit your vote, but you pay me in some other way, right? The gas fees are no longer part of the transaction, and it makes it much easier, for example, to donate, allowing many people to vote. To make it a little bit more clear how this works, suppose you have a social media page on like Instagram or Twitter, and you don't currently hold Tez, but you do participate in the DAO, and you could post the signature of your vote, kind of the permit package, which is this off-chain sending a transaction to Tezos package, to just post it on social media. And then anyone who's willing to pay your gas can submit it on your behalf securely. And it'll check and make sure it's your signature and all that great stuff. The purpose of this is really to allow much larger batches besides just allowing many more participants, because then we can really minimize the per user overhead when loading the contract. This allows us to have batches of up to a couple hundred votes in a single Tezos transaction, which is really quite a lot. And then I also mentioned that there is a custom execution lambda. So the treasury DAO and registry DAO are two examples of what you can actually do when a proposal is accepted. Treasury DAO says all proposals propose moving treasury funds around. In other words, moving FA2 tokens and Tez around. And when the proposal is executed, it will execute those transfers. The registry DAO is very similar, except it also allows you to update or create registry entries. Registry entries have a string key or a natural number key, and their value can be practically bytes or a string. So you can use this for a variety of purposes, including moderation. You can use it to configure other DAOs where the other DAO or even another contract would look at the registry and say, oh, what's the most recent agreed value for this? While you would probably use an oracle for this example, you could, for example, have pi in a registry DAO and then have people vote to have more and more precise versions of pi entered into the registry. Other examples might be, a list of administrators for a certain project, or a list of developers, or who's allowed to do certain things. It's really sufficient for most purposes to just have a registry DAO, because if you do want your DAO to do something besides, store, like agree upon a fixed value or agree upon sending out tokens, you can just have your contract check the registry. Now, in any other case, you put those next steps in the custom execution lambda. So maybe we want to configure a contract. We'll have it do any swaps or whatever, any treasury movements that we've agreed upon, and then it will also send out that contract configuration. Or maybe we're minting tokens every time we have a successful proposal, or we could have specific proposals just to mint tokens. Now, I do call this a lambda, but it should be inline to compile time into the contract, so you don't pay anything for it during runtime, and you can have all those extra little bits of logic that you might need. So what is base DAO as far as treasury and registry DAO? Well, treasury DAO, I mentioned a little bit, is group control over a treasury. The idea being that it's voting on funding different proposals. So we might have public goods, community selection, project treasuries, grant projects, or certain types of nonprofit projects. We have a registry DAO, which is an extension of Treasury DAO to allow us to pick parameters. I'm sorry, does somebody have their microphone on?
Pixel
Hello?
Pixel Lord, if you could turn off your mic.
Thank you. So there's an extensible control over parameters in contracts and external targets. Some applications include token curated registries, where we have specific curated lists of which tokens are included, or maybe which tokens can be traded to fiat or something like that. We can also do oracle selection, because oracles are one of the few things that are practically impossible to actually choose purely through contract logic, that we really want people to be auditing these oracles, and collateralization ratios. This is just another example of the type of constant that we really can't easily pick in a purely automated fashion, especially without opening us up to different types of attacks or flash loans or whatnot. And so we would like to pick those values with the DAO. Now, Treasury DAO and Registry DAO are both backend contracts, but we also have a TypeScript SDK to allow you to embed functionality directly into a website and maintain a unified user experience. That these DAOs are not made to be for a particular project. They're made to be able to be deployed quickly and easily and customized to your specific application. So then what's Homebase? Homebase is the whole front end that plugs into this. So it's what allows you to much more easily perform batch transfers and vote with permits and all these great things. When I say originating, creating, and interacting with DAOs on Tezos, I do mean base DAOs specifically, though we may have some support for other DAOs in the future. The idea is that we abstract away DAO creation from the user. Usually you'd have to originate the contract, get a copy of the contract, all these things. We make it as easy as filling out some form fields. And then we also, in the TypeScript SDK I mentioned before, we offer tools to allow you to validate an existing DAO. That it doesn't matter whether it was deployed through Homebase or it was deployed manually or through some other method like a factory on chain. We can check that it's a valid DAO once it's actually on chain. And we can also interact with any of those DAOs using Homebase. Additionally, we can add some extra UI checks to make it easier for proposals to go through and everything to work properly. So I have a quick example of creating a DAO that I'm going to play real quick, just 30 seconds. You can name the DAO, you pick a token symbol, and add a brief description. These values should be stored in IPFS, where we hash the content and then pin it. We have a voting period that's specific, like it cannot be adjusted once you have the DAO. Like the stake proposed, you might have seen real quick. There's an initial distribution, because these DAOs might only have a fixed distribution that sorry, I should mention that the distribution actually has changed. That with bring your own token DAO, that you really don't have the initial distribution inside. So we've really moved it outside to your FA2. That if you want to, set up 10 people as being the initial token holders, and then everybody else has to buy tokens or whatnot, you would do that in the external FA2. And at the end, you have to review everything that's there, make sure it all looks good, and in just a few seconds, it will deploy it to the Tezos network. All right, so we have individual DAO pages, including details on the purpose of this specific DAO. We have a description here, visualizations on how supported, opposed, or how much quorum we have. It's meant to be very visual and very explicit to allow users to easily tell what's going on and how much time they have before the next vote and all those great things. And then really one of the main things is making it easy to vote on individual proposals directly from the interface. Even if you're on a phone or a tablet or whatnot, that you can pull this up and sign in with your wallet and participate in the DAO, just like that. The proposal view shows actions the proposal is about to take and the current support against this, that proposal to see if it's going to pass. It should also be showing the quorum. And you can see that there's the history of the proposal, whether it's just been created or it passed maybe weeks ago. And here we have a quick example of proposal creation. You can, this isn't great quality video, but you can see that you can enable a batch transfer. You set the recipient amount and the proposal description. And we don't store descriptions, extended descriptions of the proposal on chain. So you simply put the ID of where you should look for it off chain. You put the address and token amounts and all that for each of your receivers. You describe why you think they should be getting these funds, because of course this is coming out of the big pool of everybody's funds. And that is it. So TQ is planning to host the first version of Homebase once it goes live. The initial MVP is planning to support the Tezos Community Grants Program. I mentioned that these DAOs are very good for grants programs and other sorts of nonprofit initiatives because they allow really anybody to participate and to vote on those grants. And finally, any questions?
When you create this token, this DAO, like you showed us on that 30-second video, and you establish there is a vote, the people get the proposal, like they make the proposition. Sorry, they make the proposition, and they like specify how much they need, right? That's something along this line.
Yep. So you make your proposal. When you make a proposal, you need a couple things. You need, of course, like a description of saying what you're actually going to do with it. But you also say what funds you require for your proposal, like you said, yeah, and who's going to receive those funds. And then you have to put a bond, which is a fixed amount of your voting tokens, on the proposal to ensure that if something goes wrong with it, you will lose some of that bond, to make sure that you're really encouraged to make sure it goes through.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that was my question. Like the people who is receiving the proposition, she doesn't touch the funds either. Like it's frozen for her too. The funds she made available.
I see. So you use these frozen or staked tokens to create a proposal and to vote on it, but the funds in the proposal are not frozen. So if I propose to send 10 tokens to 3 people, those would not be frozen tokens because the frozen ones are not transferable. You can also propose to send TES to people out of the contract. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So something we should think about is like people who make these propositions, like, and then they back out, and like people freeze the people making the proposition freeze stuff, but people offering the proposition, they don't have to freeze anything, and maybe sometime this will.
So you do have to freeze something to make the proposition. Yeah. So that's the bond.
The person who's offering like the test or other stuff, if she can still use her funds, there is a possibility that something happens and she don't have the funds to send to the people who made the proposition. That's something to think about.
Yeah. So I don't think that can happen because when you make a proposition to transfer funds, you're transferring funds from the DAO contract itself. So you have a guarantee that the funds are owned by the DAO. So the DAO contract controls and is allowed to send them if it so chooses. And that also you can't transfer the DAO funds except by a proposal. So yeah.
I feel that there are many problems that are common. For example, like the tezos program, right, is going to implement something similar. So it's interesting for people to vote or to make a proposal. But for example, for you to initialize it, you would need to deposit, for example, in hicathnunc, for example, we have HDAOs and we have some also tezos. So we could choose, for example, distribute tezos or HDAOs also for the community.
I should have mentioned that they both contracts support Tez in addition to your FA2 token. So if you wanted a third token, then you would have to. I mean, actually, it really supports any FA2 token. So it supports one for voting with, but you can hold maybe thousands of types of FA2 tokens. It's expected that those could be, NFTs, for example, held by the DAO, and then you have proposals to send out those NFTs. But it supports any FA2 token out of the box. So for holding.
Yeah. So like the FA2, it would be used for voting, right? Mostly.
Yeah. So the external FA2 you use for voting, but you can use any other FA2 as like part of the treasury, right? You can hold it by the DAO, and you can propose to send it out.
Interesting. And you think that this UI also is on the repository already from TQ? From
Yeah,
Homebase?
we do have both the front end and the back end publicly available at TQ Tezos GitHub, though they're not quite MVP ready. But yeah, so you can just plug in any FA2 token when you're deploying it. I didn't have the most recent up-to-date version of creating a new DAO, but in the new creation form, you actually just put the token address and the token ID of the external DAO. Sorry, the external FA2, and that's your new voting token.
Yeah, this logic seems like interesting indeed to have. We are thinking something similar indeed, like just using you stake the HDAO but the voting process it is a bit complex still, but it is helpful to maybe to integrate it if we can use the HDAO also.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you would use. I mean, the HDAO FA2 token you can use immediately with the bring your own token and Homebase. But if you wanted to use another DAO with this, you'd probably have to do a bit more work to get them connected or to move the features between one to the other. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and thank you for these insights.
Of course.
Would you know if the Tezos community, like people will vote with Tezos? Maybe you can do this also, or no?
Yes. So for the Tezos Community Grants Program, I believe that we may have two cases. One where you vote with Tez, but the case that I'm more familiar with is actually one where we use this new Tezos instruction called voting power, where if you're a baker on Tezos, you have some number of roles that allow you to continue to be a baker and that you can vote with, right? So voting power lets you query at any time how many roles a baker has. And we effectively use that as like a voting token. So if you're a baker with 10 roles, you get 10 votes. And we're definitely doing that, but I'm not 100% sure on voting with Tez explicitly. You would likely, with the way it's currently set up, you would need to wrap those Tez in an FA2 contract. That no matter what you do, your voting token has to be an FA2 for this DAO, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
I
I should.
this strategy for baking is interesting also for the wider ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. And I should mention that if you are wrapping Tez in an FA2, you likely, it gets a little bit complex because how do you delegate the Tez held in the FA2 that's wrapping it and giving you FA2 tokens? There is a method used by, I believe, Huxian, which is some sort of, let's just say it's a decentralized oracle. That's not exactly correct, but they allow you to delegate in multiple chunks. So usually if we're holding all of the Tez in like this FA2, we would have to delegate all of it to one baker. But if we have, hundreds of thousands of users who are holding their Tez in this FA2, or they've swapped their Tez with the FA2, that really may not be sufficient. You would want to split up delegating Tez to separate bakers, and that starts to get much more complex. There's no easy way to split it up. You have to like create like a tree of contracts. Yeah.
Yeah, like the first distribution of hicetnunc, I thought of this, like I was thinking on having a treasury where you would need a limit, like you could join till there is like I don't know 600,000 tezos, but like for you to delegate it is a lot for a single baker, maybe, or maybe even more.
Yes, exactly. So with those like huge pools of tezos, you really need to have some more complex delegation mechanism. The built-in delegation mechanism is not granular. So, I mean, I mentioned a tree of contracts. There's other ways to arrange it, but basically, the number of delegates you have has to be equal to like the number of at least the number of contracts. Like if you want to delegate to 3 different bakers, you need 3 different contracts. There's no other way on tezos.
Yeah, I felt it was safer to do the way we did with Hic, also because of this, like how to solve this issue of the tree of contracts. But that's something interesting still to think on this structure.
Yeah.
But yes, like we probably, I feel that we have some laboratories that, for example, maybe that can come from this hackathon also. Related to marketing or related to like metaverse or other like more educational efforts or smart
Right.
contracts
And
development.
you can very much have like a tree of DAOs instead, right? So you can have like the grandfather DAO program that holds the most of the funds, and then I mean you mentioned like metaverse or marketing; those could be sub DAOs, right? And just by sub DAO, I just mean that you use that DAO to create the other DAOs, and the big DAO likely can overrule the littler DAOs with a higher quorum, right? So then the littler DAOs they can vote with a much faster voting period. Something I kind of skimmed over, but your voting period kind of scales inversely with how many participants you have. So if you have a vote in just this room, maybe we would give you like an hour to actually vote. But if we had a vote among everybody at hicetnunc, we'd probably want it to be like a week. And then if we have like national votes, they have a much longer voting cycle. It can be months to years for national government. So the idea is that the giant DAO can have this very longer voting cycle of maybe months, and then the sub DAOs for maybe marketing or metaverse or a specific program or maybe research, that they can have a much faster voting cycle because they have fewer participants and it's a lot easier to synchronize a smaller group of people.
Yeah, we have been thinking a lot also, and maybe we can keep connecting and to find some solutions, because, for example, there are the community. There are a lot. Many artists have been thinking on having like artistic DAOs, you know, also maybe for studios or to organize themselves on chain also, and uh, we have been thinking
Yes.
on integrating, for example, collectives. For example, you split cells, and I was thinking, oh, if you have a collective work and you split cells, why not, instead of splitting cells, creating a DAO and having a treasury from the collective, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah, for
you're
sure.
because you generate token economics around it, and it can bring more value over the tezos also, you know, over the treasury. But
Yeah.
you're still thinking on how to design it, and like we could have like this distribution and have the also the governance for it, you know.
Right. Yeah, well, since you can use an external FA2, I think the simplest type of connection is simply actually to share an external FA2 between multiple DAOs. You can have quickly move around those tokens to different DAOs and use them to vote in different places. As far as like a specific projects and running that using a DAO, I took out the slide, but we have this group called DORG, who is a decentralized decentralized collective that they run based on a DAO, I believe on Ethereum, and they're writing the front end for this DAO, which I think is really cool. Pretty metaversey.
What's the name of the project again?
DORG,
DORG.
yeah, like decentralized organization.
Yes, I don't know if anyone have more questions, but thanks a lot, Mike, for coming here and presenting the base DAO. I was having a lot of doubts on implementing it. I mostly develop on SmartPy,
Mhm.
but I'm still thinking on how to bootstrap it and how to. But it's good also to see the work that have been done on it. Uh, we have recorded it. Hope that's okay
Yep.
in the YouTube of to have this and to share in the also with the ecosystem.
Mhm. All right, sounds great. Yeah, unless there's any other questions, I'll wait another moment. This is a wrap. So thank you all for coming, and
Thank you.
Yeah, let's keep talking and thinking on strategies for integrating it, and also for the community how to help them organize maybe using such frameworks.
yep. Yeah, so something I didn't really go into in depth, but the TZIP 17 batch permits is something that allows these to be much cheaper than would otherwise be possible. With a normal DAO that doesn't use this method, you can't even vote with multiple votes at once. Like you can only vote for yourself. But with this method, it's more like 300 votes at once. It's much more efficient. And because the DAO is always going to have a fairly complex amount of logic, that you're going to have to do a bit more logic than you need in like an FA2 token. The idea is that you can put that there. Yeah, I'm gonna jump off and probably bounce around some of the hackathon rooms. So take care.
Thank you, Michael. Be around.
Welcome.
Blessings again, man.